This is TWiT.
Back in February, the NYPD got in touch, reached out to Google, who owns Waze. And they said, now, come on, Google, we see here that your users, your Waze users, are alerting each other where there are speed traps and DWI checkpoints so that they can avoid those things. And we don't like it a bit. We think it's dangerous. We think it's reckless. And we would like you to stop. As far as I know, there's no reporting that I see out there that Google responded or did anything about this demand. If you know otherwise, Nikki, please let us know. But you, when you wrote this up, observed that, yeah, this is not exactly new, that people have been tipping each other off to where they might encounter a law enforcement officer, and perhaps they might want to avoid that place for their own various reasons, in various ways, sort of as long as there has been law enforcement. So describe to us, though, what the First Amendment ramifications are of this request.
Well, it's a governmental entity trying to stifle the rights of citizens to speak publicly. Yeah, I mean, any type of it's admittedly Waze is somewhat of a closed system, but it's still public, and the police are trying to stifle that, and so that can be problematic. And it's interesting to me too that the police are trying to do that when they love to embrace technology in order to solve crimes or just trample on the rights of the citizens. So, they're perfectly willing to embrace AI for facial recognition, even though AI tends to be, when it comes to facial recognition, somewhat racist and sexist, in part due to its programming and then its interactions with the world. So when Amazon's facial AI recognition system a while back was tested against members of Congress, they decided that a lot of the minority members of Congress matched the mugshots of known criminals. So it was clearly evidence that the AI was in using some improper analyses to reach this conclusion that the Congress people were criminals simply because of the color of their skin. And that clearly has ramifications in the law enforcement space. If the AI can't accurately read the faces of minorities, then it's going to provide inaccurate results. So the police are perfectly comfortable using that type of technology, and yet they seem to be unwilling to allow the people to notify others that there is a DWI checkpoint. We've done this forever. We're flashing our lights to let people know there's a speed trap up ahead. And so, I honestly think the NYPD should have thought twice, NYPD, before they did that. But I haven't heard of anything since then in terms of what's come of it. So I think it's probably just a pending request that hasn't been acted on. But
yeah, I think that's where things stand. You mentioned in your article, if the NYPD did have something legitimate to talk about here, as they claim they do, that there's a danger, the posting of such information, they say, for public consumption is irresponsible, since it only serves to aid impaired and intoxicated drivers to evade checkpoints and encourage reckless driving. Revealing the location of checkpoints puts those drivers, their passengers, and the general public at risk. So it seems, and you honed in on this in your piece, that what they're trying to trigger is this notion that we're all familiar with from wherever we first heard this old saw, that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, that there are exceptions to the parameters of what the First Amendment protects. And as I always like to remind people when discussing the First Amendment, and you already raised the point, Nikki, is that it applies to government actions. So it definitely is triggered here. This is a police department asking that Google take various measures. So we've got that qualification satisfied. And what they seem to be about here is arguing that there should be this exception to curtailing speech, where it's okay under the Constitution to curtail speech because there's some sort of imminent danger involved in what Google is enabling through the Waze app. Can you speak to that for a moment? Your take on first whether this would fall within that kind of exception?
I'd have to refresh my recollection on that line of cases. I'm certainly aware of the, that public safety exception, and that concept of yelling fire in a crowded place. And I can see how they might allege that or assert that it falls under that exception. But I think that what they're making a presumption that people are, or an assumption that the reason that people would avoid the checkpoint is because they were intoxicated. Certainly some people would avoid the checkpoint because they're intoxicated or thought perhaps they were. But others, like myself, would probably just avoid the checkpoint because I don't like interacting with the police. As a former public defender and a criminal defense attorney, I'm very aware of how things can quickly go awry. I find it anxiety producing to interact with the police, even though I consider myself to be a law-abiding citizen. So I think that they're operating under this assumption that the only people that are going to be avoiding it are those who are actually impaired. I think that that's not necessarily true. And I'm not sure that like I said, I'd have to read the line of cases, but I think that it's a little bit of a reach to say that by notifying people that there's a checkpoint, that puts and if some people avoid it because they're impaired, that puts others in imminent risk of harm. Certainly some people might not actually be impaired, or they may be impaired, but they're driving well enough to not be impaired under the law. And some may be intoxicated and avoiding it because of that. But I don't think it causes that imminent risk of harm that is discussed in those cases. But again, I'd have to refresh my recollection and make sure that my conclusion there actually falls under that, the analysis in that line of cases.